Okay, check 1 2, check 1 2, testing, testing. Very excited for tonight's stream. I think it is a fascinating discussion that we're going to go over. Please hit the like button and comment in the chat any questions that you have, and I will get to them. The video is monetized, but the best way to support is to hit the like button. It really helps fuel the algorithm, but if you would like to support further, there is a Patreon link below, and you can also super chat, but I will answer your questions regardless. I still would appreciate a super chat, but that they are not necessary for me to answer any questions. Like I said, hitting the like button, sharing this content, if you find it valuable, that is the most important thing, and it really does help support this project. So I really appreciate it. We are going to discuss a really interesting talk tonight, a theolocution that happened on the TOE channel, which is Theories of Everything with Curt Jaimungal. He hosted Bernardo Kastrup, who we've spoken about before. He is well known for his work on analytic idealism, and Susan Blackmore, who is a psychologist, and she is on there mainly to discuss the definition of illusionism. And we're going to talk about that because it was very interesting. But they discuss really different theories of consciousness. And so we're going to get into the weeds of that, the specifics of what they state regarding how to approach the discussion regarding, the mapping of consciousness or theories of consciousness. So there is also a link in the description below to their full talk. I highly recommend watching their full discussion, as always. And this is the TOE channel for those who are not familiar, but I would imagine most of you are familiar. If you're familiar with my channel, you should definitely be familiar with this channel. This is the stream that we're going to discuss tonight. Bernardo Kastrup is one of those people who is very interesting to me because there's a lot of similarities between my thoughts as well as his, but also some differences, major differences in how we go about discussing them. But please comment in the chat if you hear me loud and clear as well, just so I know that the stream is going well. But this talk was very good. I am a huge fan of the streams on this channel, so definitely subscribe on the TOE channel. But one thing I will recommend, even though we're not going to discuss it tonight, is to check out this new documentary that Curt Jaimungal just released. It's called Quantum Gravity's Controversial Ties to Anti-Gravity. I just watched that, actually watched it almost twice at this point. It's very good. It's fascinating documentary, mini-doc, about the history of anti-gravity research and the who's who in regarding that story, and the companies involved, the corporations involved, the individuals involved. It is a rabbit hole that goes very deep, and I've heard Eric Weinstein discuss it on Joe Rogan as well, and it's just a fascinating story to hear. Again, but those are really the only two instances in which I've heard the story discussed. That doesn't mean it isn't discussed. I'm sure it is in certain circles more than the ones that I normally look at, but it's starting to be discussed more, it seems, and it's quite a fascinating history, and it's been largely kind of forgotten or at least ignored in modern physics narratives. So definitely recommend that. We're going to take a break from the UFO topic, though. It is highly linked to the UFO topic. But this is the stream that we are going to discuss, like I said. And for intros, you should know definitely who Bernardo Kastrup is at this point, but Susan Blackmore, this is her, born July 1951, 29th. Oh wait, no, it's June 28th. So it's not. I almost thought it was her birthday for a second. It's almost her birthday. Well, happy birthday, early. But she is a British writer, lecturer, skeptic, not a fan of that term, broadcaster, and visiting professor at University of Plymouth. Her research includes memetics, parapsychology, consciousness. She is a psychologist, and she is best known for her book, The Meme Machine. She's made contributions to the field of memetics. The term meme was coined by Richard Dawkins in his 1976 book, The Selfish Gene. Did he really coin the term meme? Well, I really couldn't say that. I didn't know that he coined it. I knew he used it. The Meme Machine. Dawkins said, any theory deserves to be given its best shot, and that is what Susan Blackmore has given the theory of the meme. Interesting. A special category of memes called teams. Teams are memes which live in technological artifacts instead of the human mind. That's fascinating. We're going to have to watch that TED conference at some point. She, guessing, is no longer Christian. It's saying humanism no longer refers to religion simply as a virus of the mind. Okay. So was at one point of that mentality. Interesting. Blackmore modified her position when she saw beneficial effects of religion, such as data correlating higher birth rates with the frequency of religious worship. Yeah, there's pretty much no denying that at this point. There are definitely benefits to religious communities. Blackmore is an advocate of secular spirituality. An atheist, I don't know if actually I would agree with that, given what she says on this stream. A humanist and a practicer of Zen. She identifies herself as not a Buddhist because she is not prepared to go along with any dogma. So she's almost a Buddhist. Personal view on understanding consciousness, she considers herself to be an illusionist. She believes phenomenal consciousness is an illusion and grand delusion. Actually, I don't know if she actually does exactly agree with that. We're going to get into that in this stream. But illusionism is a cognitive bias in which people wrongly think they have a direct insight into the origins of their mental states, while treating others' introspections as unreliable. Okay, so we're going to talk about this tonight because this was something that they really struggled with, was what is the definition of illusionism? Next, we have Bernardo Kastrup. If you hear my dog at any point, that's what that is. Any kind of groans, that is my dog. Does he have a Wikipedia? Yeah. No, maybe not. But here's his website. Metaphysical Speculations. How analytic idealism is providing a new basis for objective science. I'm going to have to go over that a bit. Well, that's cool. There's an iguana. Okay, so analytic idealism, though, is what he is known for promoting, and it is the theory of nature of reality that maintains that the universe is experiential in essence. That does not mean that reality is in your or our individual minds alone, but instead in a spatially unbound, personal field of subjectivity of which we are segments.
To say that what we normally think about consciousness, all the assumptions we make, we're wrong. We're deluded about the nature of consciousness. there are lots of ways you can go with this. So more formally, the idea is this. So the problem of consciousness is basically the mind-body problem. How can there be my experience of looking at Curt on the screen and the color of his skin and the walls and the chair behind and all this experience, as well as neurons that in some way are related to that? Now, I'm being very cautious there and saying related to that, because then in 1994, the term the hard problem was invented. And that is, Dave Chalmers describes that as the problem or the question of how subjective experience arises from brain activity. Now, as soon as you say that, you're falling into some kind of dualism. And he himself, Dave, is a kind of dualist, a very...
Okay, so as an overview, there's definitely something going on with OBS where it's doing new things. So I apologize. But so there's two kind of issues that people focus on when it comes to consciousness. One is the mind-body problem, and the other one is the as she stated, it is the hard problem of consciousness, they call it, which is that how do you reconcile internal and external experiences, I think what she was basically describing it as. But the issue with this is the terminology. The issue with the mind-body problem is how you are describing it. The mind is the body, almost. The body is an externalized perspective of your mind. Okay? You are a mind. Like I've said before, you have a brain. You could say you have a body, but you are a mind. And so your body is, it's something that you have, but it's also something that you are, which is, it is fundamentally a mind. It's like one side of your mind. It's like mind has a heads and tails side. But there's no problem with that. There's an internal and external observations, or internal and external aspects of experience, but that's not an issue. That's a fundamental built-in aspect of consciousness or of conscious experience, at least in the world of multiplicity of consciousness that we exist in. So this is not an issue, but the issue is in calling it the mind-body problem. So it's kind of an attempt to say that there is this idealist aspect of yourself, this internal thought world, and then there is this external world, and how do you reconcile these two in a way that makes it so that you have coherence in their interaction? And so there isn't really a problem with this. So calling it as a problem is the problem. But also the way in which the body is described in the context of what we call the body in this framework or this proposed issue is kind of a problem as well, because the body really what it is it's an assembly of multiplicity of consciousness, which is you're an assembly of cells, and that is the body, the true body. It's the metaphysical body, but it's also the superphysical body. Whereas then, you have like your arms and legs and things like that. That is actually not, that is taking place in the mind. Okay? The fact that I have an arm is not true beyond my perspective. My ability to use myself in order to impact the world through what I perceive as an arm is real. It is true beyond me, but the perception of an arm is not. Even if other people see my arm, it's happening in their mind. They're not seeing my arm. They're seeing what they perceive as my arm, but it's actually information that they are perceiving internally as an arm. So this is kind of where it gets a bit difficult to try and reconcile our current narrative with the true narrative, because they're totally disconnected. And so if I'm failing, then I apologize. But just scrap what you know about that and assume that there is a different framework of multiplicity and singularity of mind, in singularities and assemblies, compound mental structures of sentience, of sentient beings like us, and being composed of many cells. So the other issue, issue that she kind of outlines as what people are focused on in the world of consciousness is the kind of a similar issue, but it's not stated the same way, which is reconciling our internal experience and with the idea of an external world, and how do we make sense of these two things existing. If the world is material, then how do my thoughts exist? If the world is idealistic or idealism, I don't want to say idealistic because that is confusing, but then what is the concretized reality, quote unquote, that we have to navigate and cannot just think out of existence. You cannot just think yourself out of certain circumstances that we do experience as physical. So how does that make sense with idealism? So you have to place you have to get at what you're really trying to figure out with these questions, which is different than what the questions are focused on, and then you have to contextualize them into a true context in which coherence can be maintained. But let me know if the mic is still sounding good at this point in the chat. But this is, two questions that just go on endlessly in the realm of discussions of consciousness, because they can't help but go on endlessly because there is no answer, because they are bad questions. Bad questions do exist. They have no answer. That is what a bad question is. It's formulated and stated in a way in which, if you take it at its intention, but at its actual formulation, then there is no answer. So when people and teachers say there's no bad questions, that's not true. There are bad questions, but they're just questions that don't have an answer. So like, can God make a rock so heavy you can't lift it? Like, that's a bad question. It's not placed in properly in a way in which there's a context that makes sense and allows for the question to have an answer that allows for coherence. So there is no answer. So you can get at what is the intention of that question, which is, does a God that is quote unquote all powerful have limits? That is the true question that is trying to be asked by, can God create a rock so heavy you can't lift it? It's like there's a question we're trying to ask and failing. So same thing is going on with the hard problem of consciousness questions. So hard problem, let's look this up. The hard problem of consciousness. The hard problem of consciousness is a problem of explaining why any physical state of conscious is conscious rather than non-conscious. It is the problem of explaining why there is something it is like to be for a subject in conscious experience, why conscious mental states light up and directly appear to the subject. So, why is there consciousness in a material world? That is if matter is fundamental and is reality, then how come we experience something that doesn't appear to be material? It appears to be beyond material. Even if it's inclusive of material reality, it is beyond material reality as well. And that is a question. The intention of that question has to be answered first by proposing a question that is formulated in a way that is able to maintain coherence and having it asked in a context that is true. And then you can get an answer to the question you're trying to ask. So that's why this stuff is so difficult, because you can't just say, well, that's the wrong question, because the right question is this. Sometimes you can do that, but in other times, if you do that, you have to explain why that would be the right question, which it requires proposing a context, which almost is the answer to the question that's being asked in the first place, which requires scrapping everything and starting from scratch, which is kind of what I like about what Susan Blackmore is saying in this, but we'll get to that. So as I show more clips here, like I said, let me know if there are issues with the stream. But so here, continuing.
Subtle sort of dualist. But the idea of illusionism is that's the wrong problem. We're so deluded that we imagine consciousness as something that arises from brain activity, but that just simply doesn't work. And that's why we've not got anywhere in consciousness studies with really trying to solve the hard problem. If it's the wrong problem, what is the right problem? It is the illusion problem. In other words, or otherwise known as the meta problem of consciousness, it is to understand how we got so deluded, how we have invented all these illusions about the nature of consciousness, and we're wrong. So illusionism is a kind of way of approaching the problem of consciousness. It's not a theory to kind of line up against Global Workspace or IIT or whatever. It is a way of approaching it that says we won't get anywhere unless we've understood how we got into this muddle in the first place. So illusionists have a go at describing the illusions. Does that help?
Yeah, well, before Bernardo comes in, I constantly hear that, hey, if consciousness is an illusion, and this may be one of those misinterpretations, but people would say, well, it...
Okay, so what she's saying is that illusionism, according to her definition, which is not apparently the definition that is normally used by people in the field of attempting to study consciousness, which is probably not actually successfully studying consciousness, that illusionism to her, and the way she's using it in this, means that the illusion is that we have any understanding of what consciousness is and how to approach it, and that because that is an illusion, and therefore we are incorrect in thinking that it's not an illusion, then we need to instead scrap all the current methods and try starting from scratch when it comes to understanding consciousness. So it's not asserting anything that is a positive assertion. Illusionism, in the way that she's using it, is an anti-ideology, and this is a problem. And I've talked about this many times on this channel, the issues with an anti-ideology. An anti-ideology is like anti-fascism, anti-racism, even atheism, which is really anti-theism. It is an ideology that does not assert an alternative that is a true mutually exclusive alternative that is coherent to an idea, but is against an existing idea. So it's defined in its focus on being against a current idea, not asserting an idea, but whatever the opposite of asserting is, I guess you would say denying a current idea. Her definition of illusionism is a denial of basically all current theories of consciousness, but it's not a theory of consciousness in itself. It's just a theory that's, if it is a theory, which I don't think they would even describe it as that, but if you were to describe it as an ideology or a theory, it's just the perspective that every current theory of consciousness is wrong and should be thrown out, and we should start from scratch. Or that the best way to understand consciousness is to start from scratch in its study and destroy all of our current assumptions about it. I actually agree with this, but the difference between me stating it and her stating it is that and I'm not saying she can't state it, I'm just saying like there is a massive difference, is that I have an alternative assertive proposal called sentient singularity theory. And that theory is the focus of how I approach this, and the emergent perspective that I have regarding most theories of consciousness that are out there. Not entirely. There's many actually that have many things right, I think, but there isn't really a holistic proposal. I don't think. I'm not saying that there is no details that are left out of my proposal. I'm just saying that if you look at a broad view of the world according to my theory, I believe it maintains coherence in its description of the totality of reality. It's just even in a broad sense. So there might be details that are wrong, and there's plenty of details that are missing. I'm sure of it, but that's not the point. The point is, does it truly maintain coherence in its description of our reality? And I would say that sentient singularity theory does. And so, but you should let your denial of any idea be emergent from due to your assertion of a mutually exclusive idea, essentially, not have it be the focus. Because if it is the focus, you will end up always having a hypocritical ideology, which is what an anti-ideology is. It will, because the focus can only be on what it is against. If you focus on something, you become it. So you move towards it. You can't move. If you're moving away even from something that you are denying, you're still being defined by that thing that you are denying. You have to be moving towards something. So this is why anti-fascists and libertarians act so differently, even though if you break down the technicality of what they're saying, it sounds like they're saying the same thing, but they're not acting the same because their focus is different. So this is this is something that comes up in everything that we can think about, every idea in all fields, but definitely very relevant to the study of consciousness and fundamental reality, because it's even more true, and its implications are even more severe in that realm. But so that's a big problem with her definition in this, even though I agree with technically what she's saying. But there are problems that we will see that will come up that are inevitable when you ascribe your denial of something without proposing without asserting an alternative, and you're defining it as a viewpoint, like giving it a term, illusionism. I'm an illusionist. Okay, so now you have an ideology or a theory, whatever it is, a viewpoint that is defined by absence and denial. Like, that is a problem. Skepticism has this problem. It has it's even magnified in that because of what you're trying to do when with the ideology of skepticism, or the approach or theory of skepticism, whatever you want to call it. But and Bernardo Kastrup calls this out actually in many different ways. But I will say that if it gets confusing, it's because there's some confusion in the beginning of this, because it seems like Curt and Bernardo are both still operating under the assumption that illusionism means something else, which is that consciousness is an illusion and that reality is an illusion. And this is a self-defeating idea and incoherent as you continue to think about it. So, she might agree with that, but that's not how she's using the term. And so they're going to try and argue against that or focus on that definition, even though that's not what she's getting at with the definition. But that is, from what I understand, the common definition. Let's look it up, actually. Like, illusionism, consciousness. Okay, so illusionism as a theory of consciousness typically addresses the hard problem. They accept that phenomena phenomenological, I guess, phenomenal consciousness is an illusion and aims to explain why it seems to exist. We might call this eliminativism about phenomenal consciousness. The term is not ideal, however, suggesting that it does not belief in phenomenal consciousness is simply a theoretic error. Interesting. This is a Keith Frankish wrote Illusionism as a Theory of Consciousness. That's the beginning of it. So then here it says illusionism is a metaphysical theory about free will, first propounded by Professor Saul Smelansky of the University of Haifa, although there exists a theory of consciousness bearing the same name. Illusionism is discussed here holds that people have illusory beliefs about free will. Therefore, it holds that both is a key of importance. Okay, so basically the self is an illusion. And then there's illusionism here. An active program within eliminative materialism to explain phenomenal consciousness as an illusion. It is promoted by the philosophers Daniel Dennett, Keith Frankish, and Jane. Okay. And that sounds very similar to me, actually. So I'm a bit confused. I think that the issue with this entire thing, I'm listening to make sure that the audio is still working well on the stream. But the issue with illusionism, no matter how you use it, is by definition, it is intrinsically a word that is an anti-word. It's like it is a word that denies. It is against us. It's just any term, any context in which you use it. You're an illusionist about that. You're just saying you don't believe that it's real, but you believe that we just think it is. It's like an anti-word. It's a big problem. Every now and then we come across a word on this channel that is a bad word. It is a bad word. It appears like illusionism might be one of these terms. It might be a bad word because if it's an anti-word, basically, if it expresses an anti-ideology, if it defines an anti-ideology in every instance in which it is used, then it is a bad word, I would say. And I would say it's getting close to that when it's basically claiming that there is it is, what is it saying here? Illusory beliefs of free will, which is basically to say that free will doesn't exist, but people don't understand what that means. And I hate the term free will, but it really means choice. To say that choice doesn't exist is to say that the self doesn't exist. And we're going to get into that because they talk about it on the stream. And to say that the self doesn't exist means that you don't exist. So you're denying yourself. It's a very, while you are trying to make a claim, you are also denying the existence of yourself. And it's just this incoherent, self-defeating circumstance. It's not even an argument. It's like you are part of the defeat, the disapproval of your argument. Your existence is part of it. Or your attempt to prove your argument is disapproval of your argument. It's tough, but they basically talk about it on here a little bit.
The illusionist. If consciousness is an illusion, who is the illusion occurring to? So then what is your response to that? And then Bernardo, please, you'll be able to comment on whatever you would like to.
Well, the whom it's to is all part of the illusion, because if you think of it this way, what is a self? If the natural way to imagine what a self is, or who I am, is to imagine what Dan Dennett calls the Cartesian theatre. That is, you imagine, and I think most of us are like that most of the time, a lot of meditation. I've been meditating for more than 40 years, and it blows apart to some extent, maybe eventually, completely, this illusion that I'm sitting inside my head, I'm looking out through my eyes to see the world, I'm listening through my ears to hear the world, and I'm in control. I have a stream of conscious experience and I have free will, which enables me to, manipulate myself and the world, or this body and the world. So this false idea of the self goes along with illusionism. So who is being deluded? Well, the whole thing is a delusion. The whole thing is a representation constructed by information processing system. Bernardo will set me right on this, I'm sure. The whole thing is an illusion about self and other, the separation of me and other people, the separation of me and the world. And that gives rise to all these false ideas about the nature of consciousness.
Okay, Bernardo, what is it you agree with and you perhaps disagree with?
Okay, so what she's stating is something that I agree with, which is that basically we need to start from scratch. Like there's so many problems at every turn of this attempt that we encounter that just cause incoherence. That the only way to actually have a coherent viewpoint or theory of consciousness is to start from scratch, and to do so in an ordered fashion. Like she's not saying that, but I'm saying that. She might agree with that, but I'm stating that it must be done and approached in an orderly way. You can't do this in a disordered fashion. Every step of this theory of consciousness or of reality, which I would say are the same exact theory, has to build on a previous assumption. And at the bottom has to be based on the most primal assumption. What is the first principle of first principles? What do you have to assume as the nature of reality? Why? And then why would that be the case? And would it be coherent for that to be the case? And I would say that the self is the nature of reality. A singular sentient self is the base nature of reality, and it is perfectly coherent why that would inevitably seemingly be the case, and then you build from there. But in sentient singularity theory, at least, but you have to have this theory that maintains coherence, and we're having problems with that. So this is Bernardo Kastrup's thoughts on this, and as you will hear, he is assuming that illusionism means something different than what she had originally stated, because she started to answer Curt's question, which was more associated with the common definition.
And perhaps just want to comment on.
No, there are a lot of things that I agree with, including the illusion of the personal self. I think there is no personal self. It's just not there at all. The illusion of dualism. I don't think there are two things, material brain and phenomenal states that are generated by the material brain. But for the position of illusionism to have use, it has to be specific. And when you get people talking specifically about it, like lately Keith Frankish has been talking about it rather specifically, Danny Dennett has talked specifically about it for quite a while. The claim is that the way illusionism circumvents the hard problem is by saying that phenomenal states or experiential qualities do not exist, that they are illusions. But then the problem is, illusionism is then either coherent or it is useless. It is useless if we say phenomenal states aren't what they seem. That's why they are an illusion. This is coherent, but it's useless because it doesn't do anything about the hard problem of consciousness, because the seeming is already a phenomenal state. That there is an illusion is a phenomenal state. An illusion insofar as it is experienced, and if it's not experienced, it's not an illusion. It's already an instance of that which one is trying to get rid of.
Okay, so he's basically right. And I agree with what he's trying to get at here, which is that it's that there is nothing useful being stated by the within the idea of illusionism if illusionism just means that we don't understand what we are seeing and we're wrong about our assumptions regarding it. And he's right. That's what I'm stating here. That's why skepticism or any kind of anti-ideology or anti-perspective, any anti-idea has an end point. It doesn't, and that end point isn't where the intention would be for it to be, probably. So, like, nobody wants to not gain anything from a certain idea that they hold, or perspective or ideology that they have, but they want it to lead to something, essentially. But if it doesn't, because it can't, because it's not an assertive statement, then the end result is that you either have it be useless and have it maintain coherence, or it devolves into decoherence and you end up becoming exactly it ends up becoming exactly the opposite of what it was attempting to be, which this is always a danger with an ideology that is an anti-ideology or an assertion that is a denial, fundamentally, and instead of emergently. An emergent denial due to a fundamental assertion is one thing, but a fundamental denial that will not lead to an emergent assertion, if that makes sense. It's not a two-way street. There is a directionality to thought that occurs, and it must occur, and that is because thought is a blockchain of ideas. The thinking is a blockchain of ideas, essentially, and each block in the chain has to be built on a previous block. And so if there is no previous blocks to build on, then you can't continue the thought, the thinking process. Something that's very interesting regarding this idea is that when I first, this doesn't happen so often anymore because of just the types of things that I think about now are different, but it sometimes still does. But when I first started this project years ago, this happened all the time, multiple times a day. When I realized how to think about something, which is by asserting an idea instead of denying an idea and looking for evidence of a denial, I was asserting something and looking for evidence of that assertion. What happened is that a lot of ideas that are really, like, deep, I guess you could say, for lack of a better term, or profound and widespread in their implications on every other aspect of life, and cosmology and morality and what you should do with your job, and all kinds of different intersections, I guess, and implications across many different aspects of life and different fields. Those types of thoughts, when I tried to think about those types of thoughts, and I would reach a point where basically it was like I ran out of bandwidth. Like, I would think about, like, the nature of our reality in a certain way, with a specific question that I would have, that I would propose, and I would think about the potential answers and implications, and all of a sudden I would get, like, overwhelmed, like this literal, like, electric shock almost feeling in my mind of, like, just being overwhelmed. It was like I exceeded the RAM speed of my own brain, is kind of how it felt. And I would just, like, be like, whoa, that was, intense. And then I would have to break down the idea into basic bits. And, okay, if this, then this. And if that, then this. And if that, then this. Versus what it used to be is, more often, is I would have a thought. And it would seem to be a profound idea, like, oh, the nature of infinity or something. But then there'd be, like, nothing. It'd be like, there's no thought that occurs in your mind. Maybe there's, like, a little bit, but it doesn't really go anywhere, and then you're just, like, bored, and so you just stop thinking about it. And then what that means very often is that you didn't think about it in a way where you didn't ask a question that was leading to coherent answers. You didn't ask a question for which there are answers. but maybe it just takes more thought than you can give it in 1 second to get those answers. So you'd have to break it down. But there are more answers. It was like I peered into. It's almost like if you go to take a drink of, I don't know, a glass of water or something, and it gets dumped on you all at once, and you can't drink it all at once, versus you go to take a drink from a glass and nothing comes out. You can't assume that those experiences are the same thing is happening. In one of those, there is something in the glass that you can actually drink if you take sips of it at a time. The other one, there is nothing in the glass. And it's not just that you're just not capable of drinking it. And so therefore, that's why you're not able to even take any drinks of it. No, it's because there's nothing in the glass. If that's a okay metaphor, I hope that makes sense. Comment in the chat if what you think about that. But if that makes sense. But that's kind of was the experience, and this happened countless times, and it's actually been happening a little bit more lately as I've been trying to work more on my paper and think about how to state certain things. This has come up again more because of just the types of things that I'm thinking about and the questions that I'm asking. But it used to happen all the time in the beginning of this project, and I realized what it was, and I realized how to get it, and then what to do about it, so that it wasn't just me having, some experience and then being like, oh, that's cool, that must mean there's more to this. No, I realized, okay, I had that experience, and now let's try and break it down, this thought stream into bite-sized pieces, or into processable gulps of information out of this metaphysical glass, and try and digest it, piece by piece and sip by sip, and it was really interesting, and that is something that we really, you have to kind of encounter firsthand, and it's hard for me to explain right now off the cuff exactly how to experience that. And it also, you just have to follow the thinking pattern, which I've talked about on here before, and I won't get into too much, but it is that you need to make an assertion. You cannot have a fundamental denial. You have to have maybe an emergent denial, maybe not, but fundamental assertion. And if your proclivity is to not believe something, if you want to entertain the idea or really give it thought, you have to assume it the opposite of your default assumption, your current assumption, and is true, and then look for evidence that being true. And instead of assuming that your current perspective is correct and then looking for evidence of your current perspective, or assuming that something is false and then looking for evidence of it of it being false, which means like really you're assuming that something doesn't exist on a fundamental level. If you're saying something is false, what you're really saying is you're saying that doesn't exist, and then you go and you try and look for evidence of something's falsity. Then you're going and you're fundamentally looking for evidence of something that doesn't exist, and if something doesn't exist, then there is no evidence that exists for it. So you're looking for evidence that doesn't exist now to try and prove something that doesn't exist. So there's 2 layers of issues to this, and you're not getting by either of them. So it's very interesting. There's one way to think, and but if you do that and you ask certain questions that are very far-reaching in their implications and on cosmology and things like that, then you'll get this overwhelmedness instead of this emptiness to your experience, and it's just a fascinating thing. But so
now, illusionism would be useful if it said phenomenal states are an illusion in the sense that they don't really exist. They are edited digests of neuronal processes. And that's why our experiences don't look like neurons firings. And this is Danny Dennett, by the way, because our experience is an edited digest of the neuronal firings. Now, this is incoherent because there is an obvious infinite regress, and it goes as follows. What is that edit digest? Well, it can only be neuronal processes, because for the illusionist, there is nothing but neuronal processes. So the edit digest of neuronal processes are themselves neuronal processes. So why doesn't the edit digest look like neuronal processes? Well, because then you have a meta-edit digest. But that too can only be neuronal processes. So you need a meta-meta-edit digest.
He's basically just talking about the incoherence of materialism, but as a fundamental idea, not the idea that matter exists. That's not materialism. Matter is experienced. You could say exists is the wrong word. We almost shouldn't have a word that like exists, because it implies that there's things that exist and things that don't, and instead of just different contexts of the ways in which these things exist, because even concepts exist, but that's can get into like really useless discussion, so I'm not going to get too into it. But people will say, well, does the unicorn exist? Well, if it exists as in your mind or in books, then yeah, it exists. It's like, okay, this is the problem with the word exists. Is unicorn a sentient being like a horse that exists, that we can perceive and interact with around us in physical material way? That's a better question than does a unicorn exist? Well, a unicorn, does it exist in your mind? Does it exist in Harry Potter? Does it exist in our reality in a physical, rideable way? It's like these are different questions, but in all of them, they exist. There is no instance in which a unicorn doesn't exist. There's no answer where you could say, yeah, a unicorn doesn't exist, other than to say, yeah, a unicorn doesn't exist in this context. But if that's the case, then why are you wasting your time even with that kind of framework? Basically, like, you could say, are there unicorns in Harry Potter? Or are there unicorns around us that are animals, that are real, I guess, real animals? And you could say real in this case, because, at least in my framework, because sentient beings are, you could say sentient beings fundamentally exist. So, are there sentient beings that are unicorns? No. That's a better question. Then, do unicorns exist? Everything that you even ask, if it exists in a specific context. So it's just the way, this is the problem with not just consciousness, or not just theories of consciousness, which is Susan Blackmore's kind of getting at with illusionism, is that the framework is so packed full of false assumptions that lead to incoherent narratives that we have to start from scratch. The issue with this is that it's not just the study and field of studying consciousness that is what would be impacted by this. You don't just have to get rid of all our current assumptions really and start from scratch, and maybe some of our current assumptions actually work with what you would build, but you can't build a coherent model from what we currently have. You would have to start from scratch, and maybe some current models would be coherent with the coherent model that you start from scratch. So it's not really intrinsically a denial of other theories out there, but it is a denial that of us being able to build a theory from these theories that is coherent. But the issue, the other issue with this is that because everything is built on consciousness, or interpreted through consciousness, or experienced through consciousness, or even exists as far as we know through consciousness, then our narratives around how to speak about consciousness, how to approach questions regarding consciousness, I don't want to say problems, because there is no problems with consciousness. There's problems with how we discuss consciousness. There's problems with the questions that we ask, and the framework that we are using to contextualize these questions. There are problems with that, but there is no problems with consciousness. And but because everything that we do and know and study and experience is experienced through consciousness, this impacts everything. How we study and discuss evolution. How we discuss evolution is built on the frameworks of our narrative surrounding consciousness, and must be. You can't actually discuss evolution truly accurately, or wholly accurately, let's say, or wholly coherently, without having a holistic and coherent model of consciousness in which to contextualize how you're discussing evolution and even defining evolution, or life, or love, or art, or economics, or politics, or physics, definitely physics, all of these things. And so if we need to scrap our fundamental assumptions in academia, then we basically have to level everything. It doesn't mean we never bring it back. It just means we have to start from scratch and build a new framework, and then see what currently exist, which ideas that we had previously are still coherent within the framework that we've built. And there will be plenty. Some of them will be tweaked. Some of them must be completely thrown out. But this is it's just an enormous issue, and it's not an issue with consciousness. Like I said, it is an issue with how we frame, with our framework for consciousness, and how we study it, and how we academically understand it. I don't even know if there's really academic understanding, but how we academically approach understanding it, or how we approach understanding consciousness within academia. That's a better way of putting it. So it's tough, man. It's very tough. It's hard to even make progress in a conversation about it, because you have to keep, contextualizing yourself the whole time. But as Bernardo said before, he doesn't believe in the personal self. He doesn't believe in the dualism of matter and experience, and essentially, there are just, I don't know if he's right or wrong, because this comes down to what do you mean when you're discussing this, really, but because fundamentally I would say that both things are true. There is no difference between mind and matter, and or what is mental and what is material. It's just a matter of perspective. If you're inside a mind, if we're minds inside a mind, then the thoughts of the mind that we're within will be perceived to us as higher in a hierarchy, and therefore they will trump our thoughts, and we will observe them as material reality, as concretized reality, as constraints on us that must be navigated instead of just overruled by our own thoughts. And the idea that there's no personal self, that's not true at all. There is only the superpersonal self, and then it's composed of personal selves. And this is where morality kind of comes in a way of how do we talk about this? There's a right and a wrong way to talk about this, even morally, for multiple reasons. But if we're inside a mind, if the world is fundamentally, if our, what we see and experience is primarily ideas, it's ideas within a mind. And if that means that the world is fundamentally a mind, if existence is a single mind, then it is a self. It has a self, a sense of self. And this is what sentient singularity theory emphasizes, is instead of just I think therefore I am, it's I feel therefore I am. I feel what? Myself. I feel myself. That's the only feelings that we have, is feelings of ourselves. feeling is when a thought is coherent thought is based on a feeling and it is concluded by a feeling. A coherent thought is one that is oriented in a context. It's not lacking context, which is really that's like a non-thought. It's just hard to realize that it's a non-thought sometimes. So because information is context. There's no information outside of context and information in context. Information is context. And so the context of information is within a mind, which is a self, that understands basic, its information processing is foundationally oriented around itself, and therefore it is feeling, because that is when you get information about yourself, it is a feeling. You know, you touch yourself, you burn yourself, you taste something, you smell something, you see something, you are emotionally impacted by something. These are all feelings that you experience. You don't have thoughts that are actually impactful outside of thoughts that start or end in a feeling. They must at least end in a feeling. And they would probably have to start with a feeling too, because if they don't start with a feeling, then they're not true. Like if I tell you, think about elephants, you're like, oh, okay, I'm thinking about elephants. But it's like, are you really having a thought? Or did you just like picture elephant outside context, really, like just like other than just your image of what an elephant is in your mind? Did you think about anything about that elephant? No, not really. You just kind of pictured this ambiguous like shape. But if I asked you a question about if you asked yourself a question about elephants, it's because like you have a feeling of curiosity, which is a feeling. I just want to know. Why do you want to know? Because I'm curious. Okay, that is a feeling. People don't think about it as a feeling very often, but curiosity is absolutely a feeling. It is. It's like wonder. It's just I wonder. But a true thought is based on that, versus a thought that's really just like, it's like a fleeting thought, which is, there's no resolution to think about elephants. Okay, but there is a resolution to, I wonder, this about elephants. Like, do they really like mourn their dead? It's like, okay, well, why are you thinking about that? Curiosity plus your own feelings about mourning, loved ones, and then it's resolved in this way of which you have a feeling about whatever the resolution is. So true thoughts start and end with feeling. So it's how you contextualize, how thoughts are contextualized ultimately. So but when Bernardo Kastrup says illusionism is either coherent and useless, or incoherent and kind of practical in a limited context, I think that we should shoot for neither of those. Like if that's the only way in which illusionism can be, then we shouldn't be even stating the word. Like, it's a bad word if that's the case. So next clip. This is
like Antonio Damasio claims, and I think he is right in that claim. The problem is that he conflates that with the claim that consciousness is not there. Consciousness is not a personal self. It's not a soul. It's phenomenal states. It has a precise definition. So you have to make it specific. And the moment you make it specific, it's either relevant or it's incoherent.
Okay.
I totally and utterly disagree with you. The one thing that I do pick up on that I should have said myself was, look at illusion in the dictionary, because what happened was Dan Dennett and I frequently used to get accused of saying consciousness doesn't exist. Like, what? Look, here is experience. So I actually got some dictionaries and looked up illusion, and as you described it, it means something that is not what it seems to be. And that is all illusionism is saying. Now, illusionism is not claiming, as I said before, it's not claiming to be specific. It's not claiming to be a theory that can be tested against other theories like IIT or higher order thoughts, or all the other theories of consciousness. It's an approach that says, we've got it so badly wrong, we need to start again from the beginning. Now, one way to start again might be to idealism. Well, I'm sure come on to that. It wouldn't be the way that I go, but there may be other ways to go. But you said, unless it's specific, it can't solve the hard problem. But it's not trying to solve the hard problem. It's trying to say, look, the hard problem is completely wrong because it's dualist from the start, and it asks us to solve a problem that doesn't really exist.
Okay, she is totally spot on with everything she said, other than the fact that she's giving it a label. Like, she's giving this idea a label, and that's a problem because it's not an assertive idea. You can't give kind of a perspective that doesn't have an assertion as fundamentally a label, because then the label becomes kind of the fundamental assertion in the idea and leads to it being incoherent, and it doesn't go anywhere, and it ends up becoming hypocritical and things like that. It's a problem. But her basic statements there regarding the fact that, the issue with the hard problem is that we call it a problem, and that it asserts that there is a problem and that problem doesn't really exist, and that the assumptions that frame that problem are probably incorrect in the first place. Like, that is, I would agree with most of that, but I don't call that an ideology. Okay, I don't give that a label. Sorry, there was a moth. It's like, here, let's just continue letting her speak for a minute.
What we need to do is work out just how we are imagining our consciousness to be, and see why that happened. Now, you said something like an illusionist says subjective states don't exist. Well, I mean, the thing is, illusionism is not one theory, so there are... Okay,
so if the illusionism isn't one theory, then why are we calling it a term? Why are we giving it a label? Okay, that's a problem, because it giving it something a label gives the assumption that is one idea now. But when she said that she looked up illusion in the dictionary, this is very interesting. And there's the same problem that comes up when people say that, people who use words like pseudoscience a lot will also use the word, it's like magic. They'll be like, people who believe in pseudoscience believe in magic. But what is magic? The way they're using magic is something that doesn't exist, something that's fake. And so they're basically saying people who believe in pseudoscience, people who believe in things that are fake, believe in magic, which means that they believe in things that are fake. Like this is a useless definition or idea. It doesn't give any information to contextualize what you're trying to say. So, but to say magic, it must mean something like I don't know, like something specific that has an assertive definition. Like maybe, I don't know, you believe that Ouija boards allow you to talk to the dead. I'm not saying they don't. I don't know. I don't care right now. But if you are, but to say to say they believe in magic, you shouldn't even say that. If you don't believe that Ouija boards allow you to talk to the dead, you should say he believes in something that I think is not true or not possibly true. You wouldn't say he believes in magic, because you're giving something like an assertive statement, something that it has this kind of built-in underlying assumption as implication of falsehood, but you're giving it a definition, like a label, which doesn't. You don't give things that don't exist a label. You know, see what I'm saying? That doesn't make sense. It's like making a brand for a product that doesn't exist and that, is, I don't know, there's no way to define it or describe it. But so when she looked up illusion in the dictionary, though, what she saw, and this is very interesting, is it's that something that is not what it appears to be, which means that the only coherent way to use the word illusion is in a context in which you can state what that experience is appearing to be, not being, but it appearing to be. So if I go like this, I'm like, take my finger and go like that. I don't know. It's one of those, like where it looks like you've split your finger and it's not working on the camera because I've got the angles wrong, but there we go. Well, I've got a very crooked finger. That's an illusion. It's a failed illusion here in this case, but in person, like it's, easier to do. And like a magician is somebody who does illusions. They create a visual experience, something that you see, or an image that you see that appears to be something where something that appears to happen that actually doesn't happen. Okay, like sawing somebody in half or going like this and splitting your finger or whatever. Like that is an illusion, but it's only works in context of, okay, it looks like his finger is splitting in two, and then he's putting it back together, like there's like a very often it's like you're stating in when calling it an illusion that that you're being tricked. You know what I'm saying? Like you can't say that something is an illusion really outside of the context of that it's that what you're seeing is false, or what you appear to be seeing is not what is happening. Like if you saw a woman in half in a box or something and like she keeps being alive, it's like that's an illusion. But we know it's an illusion. That's why we know it's an illusion. That's why we can call it an illusion. If we don't know it's an illusion, we really think it's real. Or if it, then it's still an illusion. It could be an illusion, but we can't call it an illusion even then. So it's just a misunderstanding at that point. It's not really an illusion, but the terms matter so much. Like I know it seems like, oh, you're just being a stickler, but it's like, gosh, language allows you to build, or it will constrain you. It will give you, build the steps from which to walk up, or it will build the walls that can contain you completely in your thinking process. And they're absolutely critical. So it's not just that nobody's thought of a good idea with consciousness. It's that we don't have the right terminology, or we're not using words properly in order to describe things fundamentally. It's not just we don't have somebody smart enough yet. That's not the problem. This is a word problem.
Thinking in different ways, but I wouldn't say that subjective states don't exist. I mean, as long as there is a subject, i.e. a self-construction, a mental model, a representation of a self, and there seems to be a world out there, then that's a subjective state. But it's not, in my mind, something that the brain generates. The brain is constructing representations, and so maybe we need to ask, well, why is there something it's like to be a representation? And then you think, well, a representation is telling you what it's like, isn't it? It's a representation of that tree and that, whatever. So I think I can understand what you're saying about it needs to be precise, but and it isn't, because it isn't claiming to be. It's not useless, because it will help us, I believe, to see through the problems of the other theories, which are not solving that. All the other theories claim to be approaching at least to the hard problem, and illusionism doesn't. And I think in that sense, in a very small way, I'm not claiming a huge amount for it really, but I think it's the way forward to go, to work out why and how the illusion appears.
I disagree with her, because when she says we need to figure out where we went wrong, like before we figure out what is the right direction, we need to figure out where we went wrong. I don't think that you can do that. I think that you have to just start from scratch, like she said in the beginning, essentially, and then figure out where it goes, and then you will know where you went wrong. But it's like a retroactive understanding. I don't think that you can proactively understand where you went wrong without knowing where you are supposed to go. So I do disagree with her there, even though it is an interesting idea. But so I thought this was interesting. This, just to reiterate, this is her defining illusionism.
Solve the hard problem. It's trying to say that the hard problem is completely wrong because it's dualist from the start, and it asks us to solve a problem that doesn't really exist. What we need to do is work out just how we are imagining our consciousness to be and see why that happened. Now, you said something like an illusionist says subjective states don't exist. Well,
So, yeah. But the next clip. This is what I mean, though. If it's not making an assertion, and it's not an ideology, really, it's not a theory, then...
It's explained away. That means they haven't got what he's trying to do at all. That book was full of traps that you can fall into. The Cartesian theatre I mentioned is just one of them. But, for example, there's a very, very common idea in most of consciousness studies, a lot of the research, which is that some processes in the brain are conscious and some other processes in the brain are not conscious. Now, what on earth could this mean? Do some have qualia attached and some don't? Do some sort of magically, give rise to, produce something called experience, or colors, or any kind of experience? It doesn't really make any sense. That's just one of them. But that whole thing has led to the search for the neural correlates of consciousness. Now, I think as an illusionist, that is one of the things that illusionism helps you to see, and that Dennett's work has helped me to see, that is a false distinction. There are not conscious and unconscious processes in the brain. It's a category mistake, if you like.
She's right, but she's also, to say as an illusionist is to state that this is an ideology almost. Like, this is a framework of looking at the world, like, that she's now defined by. This is and she herself earlier admits that it doesn't go anywhere. It's just a teardown of what we currently currently assert. Like, this is that it leads to problems down the road. It leads to compounding problems down the road to have an anti-ideology, and like endless compounding problems. Even so, again, I don't disagree with so many things that she's saying specifically, but there's so much of an issue to put this into a box and give it a label. So next is she's talking about idealism, or they're talking about idealism.
About panpsychism.
Or not idealism, panpsychism.
I'm not landing there, but I'd love to hear what you think about that, because idealism isn't the only possibility, is it? Well, you just said it was. Maybe you could defend that.
There are versions of panpsychism that would state the following: phenomenal states are not just extra properties of subatomic particles; they are the essence of subatomic particles. And all the other properties, like mass, charge, momentum, spin, these are all external appearances of that essence. And that comes down to a form of Leibniz-like idealism, a monad-like theory. But that's physically incoherent. And it amazes me that this stuff is still talked about, because we have known since at least the 1940s, at least since 1949, when Feynman published his famous quantum electrodynamics paper with the Feynman diagrams and all that stuff that got the Nobel Prize. We've known since then that particles are just metaphors for local excitations of underlying fields. In other words, there are no particles. There's nothing to a particle but the underlying field, just as there is nothing to a ripple but the underlying lake. You can't fish the ripple out of the lake because the ripple is a doing of the lake. It's not a thing, it's a behavior. Particle.
Okay, so he's right about fundamental particles or elementary particles. They're basically like ripples in a lake. They're strings of information. They're directional movements that are information, that are contextualized in the context of sentience, that interact with other ripples or other strings, and in doing so create excitations. And so like he's right. You can't fish an electron out, really. Like you can give the appearance that this happens, but not really. This is why there's a particle wave duality problem that's not really a problem. There's only a problem if you assume that it's like little bits of sand, and then sometimes it's not, and it's a wave, and sometimes it's a little bit of sand. No, it's the constraint of your own mind is causing a point of focus when you're looking at it, and it gives it a point. These elementary points would be a better definite way of speaking about this than elementary particles. And that is, again, why language matters so much. But there is no problem with, wave-particle duality or anything like that. It's not a cloud of electrons. It's not an electron cloud. It's not... it is a wave and a point of focus on a wave. That's what an electron is. It's a point of focus on a wave of information in a specific context. And what that specific context is, we can get into later. It's going to take time to prove out what that exactly means for that particle versus another, like a neutrino or something like that, or a quark. They would have different contexts. So, but when he is stating here that that Leibniz's monadology, which let's do that. So let's look that up. Monad. The monad, in ancient Greek, means unity or alone, is used to some cosmic philosophy and cosmogony. It's weird, it's not cosmology. To refer to a most basic or original substance, as originally conceived by the Pythagoreans. Monad is a supreme being, divinity, or the totality of all things. It is a singularity. That's what the monad is. It's a singularity. It's how I use singularity in sentient singularity theory, which you can look up at sentientsingularity.com, and you can read under writings and under technical description. You can read what the abstract of the paper that I'm writing, which gives the overview of the proposal that I'm always asserting in this, or trying to. So, but if you look at monadology, the word and the idea, interesting. This is monadology on. Begins with a description of monads, proceeding from simple to complicated instances. Interesting. Like describing singularities in simple and complicated instances. That's fascinating. Then it turns to their principle or creator, and so their context and nature, and finishes by using both to explain the world, explain experience. This is exactly what. That's great. I need to go through that at some point. But God is also said to be a simple substance, but only one necessary. It is the only one necessary and without a body attached. It's just he is his body, I guess you could say. But it's just body is a different. What we define as our body, what we perceive as our body, is different than what is our actual like body. I guess metaphysical body is different than a physically perceived body. Our physically perceived body is the perception of the processes of our metaphysical body. Monads, which is also the same thing as our mind. Monads perceive others with varying degrees of clarity, except for God, who perceives all monads with utter clarity. So there's monads within monads, like singularity within singularities. Fascinating. I've only heard a bit about Leibniz's monadology. I've heard a lot, but I haven't delved deeply into it, but I've always kind of identified with it. It seems to be very similar to my work. Leibniz's philosophy is sometimes called panpsychic idealism, which is like analytic idealism. This is why I'm confused when Bernardo says things like it's physically, like monadology would be physically incoherent. It's like, what do you mean by that? You might be right in the way that you mean that, but you wouldn't be fundamentally right, because there would be, why are you using physicality to define whether or not something is coherent instead of observe whether or not something is coherent? I don't know. I don't really understand what he means by that. So I'm not going to assert too much, but it just seems odd that he is claiming that that is a problem. So, but panpsychism has so many different meanings as well. This is what my issue with philosophy, and this is part of why I didn't want to go back to school for it, is even though I realized getting a PhD in philosophy, which I am very good at philosophy, just naturally. I'm good at philosophizing. I don't want to say I'm good at philosophy, because people will think that means like I know the ins and outs of Descartes' theories. No, I know the ins and outs of mine, and I know some of lots of others. But I'm good at thinking about these things, and was in my philosophy classes in college. But if I go back, it would be just for the PhD and like accreditation, so that people would take me more seriously. But the thing is that the people that would only take me more seriously because I had a PhD are not necessarily people that I care about taking seriously by, because I don't think that if they only took me seriously because I had a PhD, then I don't think they really take me seriously. So it was like self-defeating for me. And also there's so much, it's like this endless fractal of relativity that just like every other field today, it's like, oh, I'm not a panpsychic idealist, I'm an analytic idealist. Are you a materialist, or are you a naturalist? I don't like any of these terms as like a, I think that these terms cause a lot of problems, and they're endless, because there's just, every time that you differ from one a little bit, or what is the common narrative of one, you create a new one, and that's a problem. It's not the actual way to think. I think that you need like a foundational guiding ideology, and that's basically it. And that ideology should arise from your observations. What shouldn't just be like, oh, I'm this because I'm this, and therefore now I'm going to formulate everything else based on that. It's like, no, I'm this because that makes the most sense to me, as far as a fundamental framework, and then everything else is going to be factored into that and contextualized by that fundamental framework. That's why I call myself a theist. I am a theist. There are moral and metaphysical and physical implications that come from that. Scriptural, religious, political implications even that come from that to some degree. And I don't mean what people assume. I mean like logical implications by that framework. And I'm not a monotheist. Like, it's like that doesn't it's not unnecessary anyways, because God is by definition the single highest being. There's not multiple highest beings or multiple beings at the fundamental level. There's existence, one existence at the foundational level, and in terms of a hierarchy, there would be one at the top. I think logically, inevitably, if beingness is the foundational nature of reality, then there's one at the top. So, because there's one existence, do you see? Does that make sense? I keep saying, "Do you see what I'm saying?" in this stream, but answer in the chat if that makes sense or not. But if there's one existence and beingness is the foundational nature of reality, then there is one being at the top, and so, or even at the bottom at the same time. So, at the top of the hierarchy and at the bottom of metaphysical reality, at the foundations of metaphysical reality. So, because of that, there's no point in having polytheism. There is no such thing as polytheism. It's probably a misinterpretation, or where we're using God to mean God should be a term reserved for one being, I think. Or you should have a term in your language that you use that is the label for the highest being in the hierarchy of being, and that is the being at the foundational basis of that encapsulates all other beings, like essentially that all other beings are contained within and based and built on. So, and those are logically that's kind of a logically inevitable structure. It's given the assumption that beingness is the fundamental nature of reality, which you must assume because that's what your experience tells you, and you must prioritize first-hand information above any second-hand information that you have. The truest thing that you know is that you are. So, you must assume that existence is, and but more like than just is. It's like existence is I am. That's what it is. When God is asked in the Bible, by Moses, who am I speaking to? Essentially, God's like, I am that I am. I am, the sentient existence. So there's just so much, just the way we use words matters so much. I don't really know what Bernardo's issue is.
But the same thing, particles are behaviors of underlying quantum fields. And without this, we couldn't.
So one of the issues that Susan states in this discussion that I think about a lot when I listen to Bernardo speak, and to be honest, I think I'm going to need to speak to him at some point and ask him the questions that I want to ask him in order to get truly an understanding of what he really thinks about this, the things that I'm trying to understand most importantly about his conceptualization of the world, and but Susan states that it seems like idealism just replaces the term materialism with idealism and doesn't solve any of the problems. And I kind of get this same vibe when I listen to Bernardo as well, but he does counter it a little bit, and his counter does make some sense. But I think that the issue is that in denying, when he says the self doesn't exist, to say that and that it is an illusion, that is what is causing the decoherence to his framework, I think. And he says that multiple times in here. He does not believe in the self. The individual self is an illusion, and it is a process of nature as the individual self. I would agree with that, but I would also say that it exists. But there's a super true perspective, like a superposition of truth that occurs with this idea, where do you exist as an individual self, or are you just, God? Are you God? Just a piece of God, essentially, and not an individual self. the answer is both. The problem is the assumption that it's one or the other. There is a hierarchy to these two things, and both are true, but there's a hierarchy to these two things. So is it true that there is no you as a self? No, that's not true, but it is true that more truly than you are your individual self, it is also true that it is more true that you are a piece of God. And he has a sense of self. He has a self. And that self is a logical inevitability and is an eternal logical inevitability and is it cannot not exist. It is more foundational, and it exists more foundationally or more fundamentally than your self. So, but there's always a self. It's just, is it God's self or yours? In Jewish metaphysics, there's this phrase that goes, the English translation of it is something like, there is nothing but God. And a better way of stating that would really be that there is no one but God, almost. Maybe it's better to say there's nothing but God, but, or you could just say there's none but, there is only God, is maybe better, or even there is ultimately only God. But then just because there is a unity that we are all contained in, that a single unity, and we are all connected, does not mean that there isn't, that you as a self, as an individual sentient being, does not exist. You do. You feel. That is what defines a sentience, is that you have feelings. But at the same time, your sovereignty is only due to God's allowance, almost. It's like you, I guess, if he could destroy your sovereignty, in which case then you wouldn't exist anymore. And he has the ability to do it at any time, whereas you can't do that to him. But you can't even do that to yourself, I don't think. Maybe you can slowly over time, but you would not want to. And but it's like selling your soul. So it's tough because, like I said, the way we think about, the way we just talk about these things, the words we use, the way in which we use the words that we use matters so much. The framing of the question of does the self exist or not is wrong. It's like, do you as a self exist outside of the self that is existence itself? It's like, no, you don't. But you're still allowed sovereignty. So it's like, I'm not exactly sure the best way to explain it right now. I'm going to need to think about it. But the core takeaway is that it's the wrong question or the wrong statement to say the self exists or the self doesn't exist. The self, only selves can exist. And there is you as a self, and also you as a part of a single connected web that is a unified singular self as well. That is, that is the totality. So there's a self beyond yourself. That is kind of maybe the best way I can think of putting it now. There is yourself, but there is also a self beyond yourself. There is no lack of self anywhere. There's always a self there. It's just like, which self is it? Questions? It kind of sounds like you are describing computational irreducibility. I am, Tech Padawan. I am talking about computational irreducibility. Computational irreducibility is a term that it has what it means is true, and it has implications on just how everything works in the world. Because it's just foundationally true. It is foundationally true to information generation, to fundamental information generation. Your experience of overwhelm was from running up against a question whose scope answer is a computationally irreducible one. That's a good point. That's a good point. I don't know if that in some ways that's probably true. In other ways, it's probably just that I think you're right. When I had that feeling of overwhelm when I ask a question that has an answer, but it requires more steps than I can currently do at once. Then I'm running up against a problem of computational irreducibility. That's a good point. I like that. Your think of elephant example just delineated cognition from thought. Yeah, I mean, you could say that. I see what you're saying, but I don't know if people use these words differently. But yeah, I see what you're saying. Okay. Let's try and move kind of quickly. But panpsychism, what do you mean by panpsychism? Like the framework of what you mean by panpsychism very much matters. Everything is conscious is it is worded so incorrectly. Everyone is conscious. And what is a someone is the question. What is the nature of reality? Is it a some? If it's consciousness, then it is a someone. There is no consciousness outside of a self. This is where I feel like the way in which Bernardo talks about reality kind of breaks down, even if he, in his mind, has a more coherent idea of things. And sometimes he sounds like he does, and sometimes he sounds like he doesn't. But I don't know. It's tough. Like I said, I'm going to need to speak to him. He is on the list of people to speak to. And next month, we are going to begin. After next Wednesday, we are starting our new schedule, which is we're going to be live streaming on the afternoons in Pacific time. So between like 1 and 3 p.m. probably. And instead of Wednesdays. But we will next Wednesday have a stream on here because I'm going to be out of town the weekend. So I won't be able to do it on Sunday. But after that, we're going to switch to Sundays. So we'll do one on Wednesday and then one on Sunday afternoon. But we're also going to start having more interviews and guests on as well. And he's on the list. So hopefully we can have him on here. But next clip. So this is on idealism.
The fields objectively existing, why do they behave the way they do? I mean, how do you get, if everything is basically mind or mental, I'm not sure whether you would say everything is conscious, but anyway, if everything is mental, and that comes first, why do we get these apparent laws of nature, the way things behave?
This is why I try and avoid using the word consciousness, and I use the word sentience, because how can you say the world is mental but not conscious, and there's no self, but it's all consciousness, it's all idealism, like it's incoherent. And it's because consciousness has multiple definitions and means multiple things to different people.
The consistency. Why? I mean, at least materialism has some kind of answers to the way the world behaves, or are you saying it doesn't? I just think you shift from one to the other. You shift from materialism to idealism. I don't know what you've gained in doing that.
Well, you avoid dualism. You avoid the hard problem
of dualism. Yes, absolutely. We have to avoid dualism.
And you avoid the hard problem of consciousness.
Yep, agreed.
The notion that something that is mental in essence cannot behave regularly is merely a metaphysical prejudice. Human minds evolved in a planetary ecosystem, and therefore we evolved to be very reactive. And so you could say human minds, which have developed higher level mental functions and are reactive to their environment, they're difficult to predict. But although even human minds can be predicted, and psychology is making progress in that direction, but a mind without higher level mental functions can behave according to precise regularities. Why can't
right, that's what I want to understand. Why are there these regularities or laws or consistencies? So you say that our mind it works in particular ways. Why does it produce the appearance of a brain and neurons and all of that kind of stuff?
These are two questions. So why does it behave regularly? Because it is what it is. That nature clearly behaves regularly. I mean, whatever metaphysics you have, the regularity of nature's behavior is a given. We can predict what nature will do next. That's why technology works. Otherwise, it wouldn't. But the prejudice is that mind can't behave regularly. Well, The news is it does, even if it's so complex that it's difficult to predict, it does behave regularly. And two, we cannot anthropomorphize that mind of nature out there. That can be probably is, a very simple mind, didn't evolve higher level mental functions in the planetary ecosystem. It's an instinctive, spontaneous mind and behaves according to regularities. Alligators have very regular behavior. If you approach them and you cross a certain threshold of distance, they may lunge at you. But if you don't cross that threshold, they never try to lunge at you. Minds can be very predictable. So this is not an argument against idealism. Now, why does it seem the way it does? Now it's a technical answer, so Curt, cut me if you think it's going too far. But there are two reasons for this. One is we cannot see the world as it actually is because there would be information overload. It's like seeing the files in your computer on your desktop exactly the way they are. Millions of open or closed microscopic switches. That's useless. It doesn't favor survival. What you want is to perceive the salient features that are relevant. That's one answer. The other answer is entropy control. If our inner cognitive states would mirror the states of the world, there would be no upper bound to our internal entropy because there is no a priori upper bound to the entropy of the world. So if we were to mirror those states in our inner cognitive states without a bound to our internal entropy, and I'll use an illustrative metaphor, we could melt into hot meat soup because unbounded entropy is not compatible with structural and dynamical integrity. And this has been shown mathematically by some neuroscientists. So we see the relevant and salient information about our environment at a glance. And the result of that is what we call the colloquially physical world, the contents of the screen of perception.
Okay, so this is a lot to unpack, but it kind of gets at a lot of his ideas, which is that basically nature is, or existence is a mind. And he says that it's probably very simple and with no higher level thinking. I don't know what higher level thinking is. Does it have a sense of self? Yes, it does. Does it have feelings? Yes. Does God feel? God thinks in a simpler but also more complex way than we can even almost can imagine. I would say it probably can't imagine, but we can kind of conceptualize part of these things. Why does God think simply? Well, because he's constrained by his oneness, and you can kind of get into the in certain moment preceding creation, God's thoughts would be probably more simple, but there's nothing else to think about. So like other than himself, and the nature of himself, and then what matters, and then you could get into meaning. So like, is that higher level thinking? I think that's as high level as you can get, but it just depends on what you mean by high level. So I don't like the term. But is God capable of metacognition, or thinking about? Is he capable of thinking about himself and about thinking beyond himself? In a way, yes. In a way, it's not even a yes or no question. It's like a yes and question. Yes, he can think beyond himself, but that is, even his beyond himself is created with it is for him to create other selves, and it is only within himself. So it's not really beyond himself, but he creates others, which in order to create beings beyond him. But it's not really beyond him. It's just beings other than him. So there's language issues here with trying to understand this, but I do like what he is saying, though, about minds being predictable. When I first proposed this sentient singularity theory to a physics and math Discord many years ago, this is a model of the basic framework. You can see hadron. It has the different levels of sentience or periodicity of sentience. Hadron is an assembly of quarks. An atom is an assembly of hadrons. A molecule is an assembly of atoms, etc. So you have assemblies structures here that form singularity structures here, and it just shows the merger of the many in one situation. I don't want to call it a problem. But I was talking about how hadrons are probably sentient, like proton and a neutron appear to be sentient beings. They display all the qualities of sentient beings in my model, to me at least, and it makes sense that they're sentient in the lineage system that is proposed in my model. And and the person said to me, and it was so funny, I'll never forget it. He said, hadrons are, nobody believes that hadrons are sentient. And I was like, yeah, I believe that hadrons are sentient. He was like, if that was the case, you wouldn't be able to predict anything. And this had been a multi-hour long conversation already. So like we were kind of, there was predictions being made by everyone involved on where the conversation would be going at this point. It wasn't just the beginning of the conversation. And and it was not even the first conversation. And I'd stated, well, you're sentient and you're still predictable. And it's like, that's true. I'm predictable. I'm not always predictable. Can't always predict what I do, but you can't always predict what this guy does. But very often I could predict what he was doing, and he would probably very often predict what I was doing, or what I would do in a certain moment. We can make predictions about people all the time. We do it constantly. And like Bernardo said, certain animals are extremely predictable, more predictable than people. And it's because the scenarios in which they have access to process in their minds are much more limited because of their language limits. Their linguistic limits put limits on their ability to describe and discuss and therefore think about abstract, I don't want to say abstract, but circumstances beyond their immediate circumstances. And so we can say, oh, well, what do I want to eat tomorrow? Well, I don't really feel like I want to eat anything that I've already eaten. I kind of want to eat something that I've never eaten. So like, I want to eat something that no one's ever eaten. Let me think about some type of food that I could create that nobody's created and come up with a new recipe for, I don't know, Nutella ravioli or something like that. And therefore now we're talking about Nutella ravioli. We're not even talking, we're not eating ravioli. We're not eating Nutella. There's no Nutella or ravioli even in my house. And I'm thinking about it tomorrow, and not even just eating tomorrow, but like creating something that I've never eaten, that doesn't exist, in order to eat something that I've never eaten tomorrow in a circumstance that isn't the current one. So like you're really thinking about something that is far removed from the current circumstances in some ways. It's not immediate. It is immediately. It's far removed from the immediate circumstances, but it's not completely disconnected either. You can't completely disconnect. But snakes and alligators and lizards, and I am an expert on herpetology. If you follow these streams, I have countless geckos that I study and keep over there, and snakes of all different kinds, literally dozens. I've worked with every group of reptiles that exists, and they are much more predictable. Even the smarter ones, like crocodilians, like alligators. An alligator is quite predictable, but it is sometimes unpredictable, and I know that too. It's not always predictable. It's just very often predictable. Usually a snake won't bite, or an alligator won't bite if you don't get within a certain distance. But then you get within that distance and they'll strike that. But this is also something that they can choose to violate. They can make choices. It's just rare, because they're not thinking about circumstances beyond the current one. So they're not able to be as they don't have as many degrees of freedom open to them in a single moment as we do. But when we're fearful, we act very animalistic, and and it's very, very hyper focused to a circumstance. So we have the same nature sometimes as well. But it's simpler beings, especially it's simpler in an objective sense, not like a relativistic sense, in kind of an absolute sense, which you're lower on a periodicity of levels of sentience. You're on a lower level. You're not just less intelligent. You're not a gecko compared to an alligator, which an alligator is far more intelligent than a gecko, but they're on the same level of sentience. But a hadron would be on a completely different level of sentience than a gecko, and but so it would be even more predictable. But there would probably still be certain instances in which choices could be made. It would just be exceedingly rare. And, you know, by the time we're studying hadrons, maybe the circumstances have been so learned by all hadrons that they don't make decisions that appear out of character, because they're just so aware of their environment at that point. You know, by the time multicellular organisms come into play, it's like hadrons would have a lot of experience living, if they are in fact sentient. But when I don't really think it's useful what he had said later on, though, about how that why we see the things that we see is because it would be so overwhelming for us to see everything, and it's not useful, so therefore we can only see like specific key relevant bits of information. I think that's true, but that's why we focus on certain key bits of relevant information, but it's not why we see the structures that we see, which is, I think, more what she's getting at, which is it is just that information processing can only be done a certain way, and that because of that we will see the structures that we see, which sounds similar to what he said, but I don't think it's the same thing. But it might be, actually. I'm not exactly sure. Bernardo is sometimes a bit difficult to know exactly what he means on some things, but
more conducive to survival and to maintain your...
Because then he goes into, it's more conducive to survival if it's like this. It's like, that's not why it is the way that it is. It is the way that it is because it's the only way for information, for a mind to be structured, given the constraints of existence, and of mind, which are the same thing. So it's kind of, it's wrong to even ask the question, why do we, the way that it's been asked. You'd have to ask specific questions like, what is the process that is causing us to perceive an electron point, versus what is the process that is causing us to perceive a neutrino point or a quark point. You know, I'm using the term point for intentionally instead of particle. That's a better question. You could even ask why do we see the manifold structure that is space-time? Or you could say, or 4D space-time. Why do we see a four-dimensional manifold structure? Why does the standard model have the symmetries that it does? What is causing that? Those are good questions, but they're specific, and that means they have answers. To just say, why do we see what we see? Well, the only answer that really is, the answer that you can give is because it is the way that it is. Information processing is the way that it is because that is what information processing is. There's only one way for it to be, so there is only one way for you to perceive things. But it's not a good question. I would say that even that falls apart. You need something specific to anchor it and contextualize it. But that's why I think what I was saying is something a little different than what Bernardo was saying, because he starts getting into, we're beings in a solar system and we are reacting and we're trying to survive, and then he gets into entropy, which, if you're talking about entropy, then you're talking about relativity already. You're not thinking about things in a fundamental sense. There is no entropy fundamentally. There's what exists eternally, fundamentally, or it isn't. Or it changes, but it doesn't change because of entropy. Entropy is an emergent perspective that we perceive in relativity and only in relativity. It's not fundamentally real. It's only it only is able to be perceived in relativity. So the whole like internal dashboard thing, I get it. It's a useful metaphor. Bernardo Kastrup uses it. So does Donald Hoffman. And I'm into planes, and so I get it. Like, you can fly a plane without even looking out the window if you have the right instruments. But if you're using my issue with this metaphor of like, oh, it's just a dashboard, is even though there's some truth to what it's trying to get at, actually what it's also causing is it's causing duality again, where like there is the actual information and then there's what you perceive, and it's instead of it just causes duality, which you're trying to kind of, I'm not going to say you're trying to escape, but if you're seeing duality and that duality is not two sides of one thing, it's a differentiation, then it's a true duality, and that is not fundamental. Okay. Now we're going to just look at a couple more clips, and then we're going to go. This one is on the boundaries of information. So Bernardo Kastrup says that there are, what did he say? Dissociative boundaries. In idealism, all matter is formed from mental states and dissociative boundaries, which is why I can't read your mind. And he says dissociation is...
But I do know by playing around at the edges...
He said that... that a dissociative boundary is information isolation. This is very accurate. I really like that the way that he said this. It's very well worded, which I don't usually. A lot of times, I don't want to say I don't usually. A lot of times, I don't like the way he words things, but this one I really did like.
There are obvious correlations between this stuff and what we feel from within. Denying those correlations just silly. Just, okay, no, you don't even enter the party if you deny that. How can we account for that under an idealist perspective? Under idealism, all matter is a dashboard representation of a mental state when observed from across a dissociative boundary. But forget
Say that again. Observed from
across a dissociative boundary. Because we have to account for why can't I read your thoughts? Why do I not know what's happening in the galaxy of Andromeda? If it's all only one big mind, then why am I not enlightened, right? So we have to account for that. And the account for that is dissociation, which is something that psychiatry now managed to show objectively with the advent of neuroimaging that it does happen, and it can literally make you blind. So why wouldn't it make you blind to what's happening in the galaxy of Andromeda or in the mind of another person? And then the way it all comes together is all matter under idealism is an inner cognitive representation of external mental states when they are observed across a dissociative boundary. That's what matter is. Now, your neurons are made of the same atoms and force fields that make up the rest of the universe. They are also material. So your neurons are what your inner dissociated mental processes look like when they are observed from across a dissociative boundary. Your body is what your dissociated inner mentation looks like when it is observed from across a dissociative boundary and represented on a cognitive dashboard, so to say, like the dashboard of an airplane.
Can you please give me this?
I would say a better way to put this is it is what is observed when you are observing your mental processes integrated with the mental processes of others, with those that you are nested within and those that are interacting around you. More so than just it is across a dissociative boundary. There is a dissociative boundary, and it is a directional dissociative boundary, though. Like, we are not God, but God is capable of being us if he wants to be, and eliminating us. And eliminating the dissociative boundary, passing beyond, going through the dissociative boundary. But we are not capable of doing that to him, really. There's a hierarchy, and like I said, a directionality to, a directional hierarchy to, dissociative boundaries. And dissociative boundaries are the boundaries between beings. That's what they are. And it's funny, Susan Blackmore said this at a certain point earlier. I don't think that I showed the clip, but she basically said that any mind can be an information processing system that is able to identify that which is internal and that which is external, which sentient singularity theory is based on 4 primary perspectives. So a sentient singularity or a sentient being orients itself, is able to perceive itself by perceiving these 4 primary perspectives: inside, outside, separate, and oneness. And they are entangled and defining of each other. So being aware of just what is outside means that you're also aware of what would be inside and what would be separate and what would be one, etc. So awareness of one of these necessitates an awareness or implies an awareness of all 4. It implies an awareness of all 4. Because it requires an awareness of all 4. So it's 4 simultaneous perspectives that you must be aware of in order to orient. That's what these primary perspectives allow for. They allow a mind to orient beyond relativity and beyond faster than, bigger than, smaller than, far from, brighter than, whatever. And so what she said is basically what I said there, but this dissociative boundary, though, is the boundary of sovereignty of what of choice, and most fundamentally, and it also has you're less connected in different metaphysical ways from each other, and that causes dissociative boundaries that are contextual. If I have a feeling, but those are relational they are what is the word they're contextual. That's what I said. And so like you can have a bad day and I can have a good day. You can feel good and I can feel bad. But if my wife feels bad, I will not feel good. I will feel bad if my wife feels bad. So there are degrees of freedom and constraints in these relational boundaries of entanglement of feeling that do exist. But as far as the true dissociative boundaries, they are on choice, free will of sentient beings. Your ability to make certain choices. Not every choice that you make is a true choice. Everything that we think of as a choice today is not really a choice. Most things are motivated by instincts and context, and learned behaviors and stuff like that. But every now and then, you are able to perceive 2 simultaneous perspectives, a superposition of viewpoint. You get a superposition of viewpoint where there is a differentiation between that which your instincts are guiding you towards and that which a higher perspective has caused you to become aware of. And now in those instances, you can make behavioral choices, or at least trajectory choices in behaviors over time, even if the behaviors are still highly motivated by instincts. Like eating different foods that you like the way they taste, but you think that you shouldn't be eating them, either for religious reasons or moral reasons or health reasons or whatever. I'm not going to say every individual action is a choice. I mean, it is, but it's also a direction choice that's there. It's like 2 degrees of choice there. But you have a choice of where to aim your efforts, and also what to do in certain situations. And I would say that's a better way of putting it. Those are like the 2 types of choices that you have, but they're really linked. It's like you are a lineage and you're also an individual. You are also your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents and your great-grandparents and your great-grandparents and your great-grandparents, but you're also just you as an individual. There are individual choices, and there are also like directions of directional aims, like life trajectory choices. But yeah, this is the dissociative boundary that is real. It is the true boundary between beings, is sovereignty of choice. It's not a feeling. There are there is more direct entanglements and less direct entanglements when it comes to feelings, and when it comes to awareness. But there's also a hierarchy to these things as well. So, like when Bernardo says, "Well, if all is one, why am I not enlightened? Why can I not read your mind?" And to say, "Why am I not enlightened?" is to say, "Why can I not read God's mind?" And in a way, but you probably can become enlightened. It's just up to God, or it's mostly up to God. It's ultimately up to God. It's partially up to you, ultimately up to God. You have to be able to receive that, and He also has to choose to give it to you. But He can probably only give it to people who are able to receive it, and then, or whatever that means. I hate the term enlightenment because it sounds so conceited, but just like to perceive the logos of the cosmos, or to would be like the order of the cosmos would be the best way to describe, I think, enlightenment, as far as I could understand it now. If that's not what it is, then I'm just not enlightened enough to tell you what it even means. But it would be, again, down to choice. So, but the thing is, this is why it's, the fact that he's not putting it into the context of choice is like, it's just an incoherence in the way that he's discussing idealism. Because I think it is because to frame your worldview as that the world is fundamentally ideas is to disregard the context as being of those ideas as more fundamental. Like, why isn't it not like cognitive mentalism or like mentalism? Why is that not your worldview if you're an analytic idealist? You know, like if the world is more fundamentally ideas than it is matter, even if there is matter, and that it is, you know, I don't know, ideas in a specific context that appear to be concretized reality, or concretized constraints that we have to deal with, and then the true nature of what is creating the perception of those concretized constraints that we have to physically deal with is ideas, and those ideas are in a mind. Then yeah, ideas are more fundamental than matter, but then minds are more fundamental than ideas. And why not be, you know, mentalism? And if that's the case, then like a mind is a sentient being, then it's a self. So like, why are you not a selfist? Like, you know, it's like, it doesn't make sense. Why stop at idealism? This is why I don't like these terms as in philosophy, is like they are ideological worldviews. Because if they're coherent, then they're contextual, and if they're contextual, then they better be fundamental if they're going to be given a term that is like a worldview, almost. They either be super contextual or they're super contextual to, you know, the foundations of reality, or they're hyper contextual to like a specific instance of reality, you know, like cellular biology or multicellular biology. It's like, I'm a multicellular biologist. That's a kind of a field that more so than it is a worldview, though. So I don't like the term idealism, and I don't like the term illusionism. I don't like the term materialism, but matter is fine. Ideas is fine. Illusion is even fine in the context of you're sitting in a magic show and you know it's a magic show. But I don't like a lot of these terms. Same thing with politics. I don't like the term libertarianism anymore. I went through, it's like, are you a liberal? Are you conservative? Are you a libertarian? It's like, in certain, what does that mean? Like, I don't, all of these, none of these is are foundational enough to be all-encompassing. And yet, all of them will lock me into a limited perspective that is then applied to all instances, which is bad. So it's the same exact problem that we have in philosophy and metaphysics and even physics now, where you're like, oh, I believe in the multiverse. I'm a string theorist. Are you a string theorist, or are you I don't know, like something else that's not a string theorist. It's like the only thing out there right now. But analytic idealist. But none of these are really there. Theism is there. But I don't really like the term, these terms to describe, like, even, religions. It's like, are you a Christian? Are you a Muslim? Are you an idealist? It's like, no, what is Islam? What is Christianity? Not are you a Christian? It's just problematic. I don't know. I'm going in circles, but a theist could say, I'm a theist. I'm a sentient, singular sentientist, or sentient singularity, singularist. I'm a sentient singularist. You could say that maybe. But if you wanted to boil it down to one term, really, like, I think theist is the best so far. But and I wouldn't want to call myself anything else. I'm not a capitalist or communist. It's like, do you believe in taxes? Or like, I don't, it's there. These things break down when you're trying to imply them beyond their scope. And because they are meant to define you, and you exist beyond the single instance in which the scope of this word exists, you exist beyond, in many, contexts, and some of which are beyond the scope of this term. That term carries with you and then now has to try and be applied beyond its scope of coherence, and it doesn't. It falls apart. Same thing happens with these other terms. People are like, oh, he's a Marxist. He's an analytic idealist. He's a materialist. He's an illusionist. I don't think that these are helpful anymore. I don't even think the term theist is helpful until you have first defined your beliefs and therefore can define exactly what theism means and why it would mean that. So to start from a label and then move forward, I think is as far as figuring out a worldview is wrong. You get the worldview and then you figure out what term fits it. When I said illusionism is defined by Susan as basically basically it just means we don't know what we're talking about. Bernardo Kastrup calls this out in this next clip, and it's pretty good. He's very right.
You for that or anything, but I'm not comfortable with it. And the reason is the following. Defined so vaguely, the history of science is the history of illusion, because hardly anything is what it seems to be. I mean, you see, the whole history of science is a testament to that. So if the word is so broad that it encompasses so much, it becomes a useless word because we can't specify something out of the background by using it.
But don't forget, all I'm saying is consciousness is an illusion. And by that, I guess what I mean is the way people talk about consciousness, the theories they build about consciousness, the whole idea that consciousness is, there's such a thing as consciousness itself, which can be separated from, matter, from unconscious, and so on. All of that's the problem. I'm not trying to say anything about the outside world and physics and so on as being illusory. I'm simply talking.
First of all, think about this. There's so much incoherence to both of these statements, because you're not starting from scratch when you're talking about them. Part of the issues with these streams, and I will admit this, is, the one part of the reason why I have such a hard time stating exactly what I'm trying to state, and why they can get a bit rambly and incoherent, other than the fact that I can just ramble, is that the context in which I'm trying to explain my thoughts is the stream that I'm talking about. And if they're already operating on only assumptions that are not fundamental, even if they're true, they're not fundamental, and we're trying to talk about fundamental reality, I have to start from scratch really and explain my entire worldview and then talk about why. And then I wouldn't even need to state discuss what they're talking about, because you would just see what I believe, and just in understanding what I believe, you would understand what the differences would be between what I believe and what they believe, and the similarities. I wouldn't need to explain it. And when I make the video that's to come and be released with the paper soon on sentient singularity theory, just a basic overview, you will see a level, other than the fact that it's not live, and that matters quite a bit. It's not just a stream of thought kind of circumstance. I chose my words more carefully. You will see it will allow for a level of coherence that is just not possible in a commentative stream, and even that's even possible in some of my older streams when I talked about just a certain idea and didn't discuss what is the current talk about it so much, which is and more just talked about what things should be. I almost did a stream tonight on personal sovereignty and the legal ramifications and considerations regarding that, what is fundamental personal sovereignty and the order in which it would be naturally contextualized in, and kind of the implications on government. I almost talked about that, and I will do a stream on that, but I wasn't as prepared as I wanted to be, or as I would want to be. But it would still be probably pretty coherent, because I would be not as focused on what I would call a already misled kind of linguistic framework, or even if you're not going to say anything else about I'm talking about people who are wrong. That's not what I'm saying. I've said I try to focus on what I agree with people on in these streams. That's part of why I do that, is because it's the best way to maintain coherence. But when we're really talking about fundamental reality, you have to have it so right, or else we're just screwed. And we have to really talk about a lot in order to explain why something is wrong. And even then, it's tough. This discussion in particular, especially in terms of concepts which constitute are a perfect example of Wittgenstein's notion that all philosophical disagreements are disagreements in language. That's so true. That all true philosophical disagreements are disagreements in language for the most part, except maybe one, which is, does sentience arise from non-sent? Is existence a singular? Is sentience fundamental, or is it emergent and not fundamental? That would be the main philosophical disagreement between that would be the only one. And but everything else is just a disagreement in language, for the most part. Sometimes you have to earn it, or even actually most of the time. Yeah, we exist within a very small universe, and a very long time is actually nothing. I would say we exist. It's not even worth saying small or long time. It's still stuck in relativity to say that, but I think I see what you're trying to say, and I think I like what you're trying to say. But we shouldn't even say small universe. We exist in a very entangled cosmos. Taking advantage of this ambiguity, I would make the case against the self and still account for subjective experiences, despite not even believing this to be the best way to conceptualize it. I don't know what you mean. How you could make the case against the self. Yourself or God's self? Like when you say the self, do you mean yourself or do you mean the self? The self of God or all selves, and that there is no self of God or of you, because those are very different things. I think both exist, but both inevitably exist right now, but in the context in which we're asking the question. But there's a hierarchy to their existence. Yes. Have you tried reaching out to Chris Langan for an interview? Not yet, but I am planning on it. I think that would be awesome. I think Chris Langan and I would have one of the best discussions on the internet. And I hope that is the case and it's not just like a total bomb. The biggest issue is in going into this, and I actually think Chris could do this, even though I think a lot of these people would assume he can't, but watching his discussion with Bernardo Kastrup and others, I actually disagree with the idea that he wouldn't be able to kind of assume that you are, because he assumes the CTMU to be correct, you have to also assume that other people have it right too, even if they're not calling it the CTMU, in order to have like a good discussion. Otherwise you're just going to be lecturing to them, and I don't want to do that because there's enough videos of him explaining the CTMU. I want to talk about certain things about reality, and have a discussion. But he is actually good at that kind of thing. I think Chris and I would have a great talk, and I will definitely be reaching out. He's very high on the list of people that I'm going to try and do. Probably one interview a month is what I'm shooting for to start. But they're going to be, I'm going to try and make them different from other interviews that people have done with a lot of the people. And so if I don't think that I can do an interview that's different or have a discussion that's different, then I'm probably going to not want them to be at the top of the list. Just because there's so much content out there, and there are better to interview someone on these topics is something that other people can do better than I can, probably. But I think I can have discussions with some of these people on this stuff that few others can't. But these theolocutions that Curt has, like, it would be more like that. I want to have like a theolocution with somebody. But I want to get at not where do we disagree, where do we agree. I want to get at like the different aspects that are relevant constraints and dimensions of discussing this stuff and advancing it forward in the public understanding and things like that. The constraints of working on models of fundamental reality. And I want to discuss that with people who understand it. I think that would be interesting. I want it to be kind of like a talk with people who are watching as like a fly on the wall of like almost like a private discussion. The Portal, Eric Weinstein's The Portal did a really good job of this with a few talks that he had too. One with Garrett Lisi that he had, one with Roger Penrose that he had. I mean, he had a number of them. They were very good. Some were better than others at doing this specific thing, which is like kind of just giving us a portal into a true discussion that is almost, it's for the people who are having the talk, and then there's just people witnessing it, instead of it being for the people witnessing it, if that makes sense. It would be, I want to have discussions that are for me and Chris, and then just make them public. That is the best way to describe it. Or me and Bernardo Kastrup, or me and Donald Hoffman, or anyone else who is on this list that I am going to be inviting. Carl Friston, whoever. I want the talk to be for us, not for you guys, not for the viewers. Even though, because I think that's the best way for you guys, for the viewers to also get something unique, and I think it's the best way for everybody to get, something entertaining and useful, and that's most entertaining, most useful, and most unique. So that I've been trying to figure out a way to say it, but that's the best way to say it. Have discussions that are for us, for the participants, primarily. I meant the individual subject of self, not God's self. I mean, yeah, you can make the argument that you don't fundamentally exist, I guess, if you or your existence of yourself is not as fundamental as the existence of God's self, and that the existence of God's self is more fundamental than the existence of yourself, and therefore at a certain level would trump the existence of yourself. You could make that argument, but it doesn't destroy it. It's not an argument against the existence of yourself. It is an argument about the hierarchy of existence. This is why I think that the same thing we need to do with these theories of everything, and I linked in the description below to my theories of everything how-to guide video that I did for Curt Jaimungal's Pace 1 Physics and Consciousness video competition, and that video it's definitely really good. You're always your biggest critic, and there's some things that I wish I did differently or said differently, but that video talks about how most of these theories are not actually competitors, that we should put them in, we should assume that they would coexist in a hierarchy, in a relational hierarchy, and then kind of try and arrange them into that hierarchy. That's what you need to do with everything that's part of fundamental reality, or a model of fundamental reality, or a description of fundamental reality, or structure of fundamental reality. So the self is definitely that, because it is, I would say it is fundamental reality, is itself a self. You can't even say, if you say fundamental reality itself, it's like you're already, you can only describe it as having a self almost. It's like, and I think that that's kind of inevitable. But its existence, or itself, the existence of itself as being in a state that trumps the existence of yourself, does not negate the existence of yourself, because it consciously created you as a self. There's moral and logical reasons why you should not deny yourself the existence of yourself. You should submit the existence of yourself to the existence of God's self. You are below it, below God's self in a hierarchy of being, but you don't not exist. That this is why it's very important. We think we have to recognize that saying they're two very different statements. I don't think it's correct to say that your self does not exist. I don't think that is correct. I think it's incorrect. But it is true that you are most fundamentally the most fundamental level of fundamentality, your beingness would be trumped by a bigger, more foundational being. But they can be coexisting. I mean, if I wanted to play with semantics, I would conceptualize the universe and our experience within it as being nothing more than or analogous to a giant instance of Conway's game of life. Yeah, I hear a lot of people make that like analogy. I actually have not played life. Some people were talking about it recently. Interesting. I need to look more into it. I can't tell you much about it, but the name makes sense. While I personally wouldn't choose to do that, I would see how someone could arrive at the same conceptualization honestly, with simply as a result of them having or using different definitions and meanings. Fair enough. By the way, if you haven't, please hit the like button. It really helps fuel the algorithm. After this, I will edit out the span of me fixing the audio at the beginning, by the way. But it might take some time because it always takes time to process. Okay. We did not hear from Curt much in this interview. He even says that at a certain point. He's like, the best theolocutions like this one are ones in which I'm just a fly on the wall or something like that. And but this is a moment where we will hear from him, actually.
Because you don't place yourself in opposition to something. Whereas Bernardo, as far as I see from you, if you're in opposition to something, it would be materialism. So let's just take materialism. What evidence or event can occur that would make you reframe your worldview to the opposite side, so materialism? Like, hypothetically, what could happen? What could you...
So, just because it goes on and it kind of goes back and forth on what topic he's discussing in his answer, in what Bernardo's asking, or in Bernardo's answer, he jumps between topics. But so I'll just explain basically what he said is, and in some ways I really like what he said, which is that I would, because we're talking about fundamental reality essentially, I would have to completely abandon all of what I know and go back to being a baby, in order to believe in the opposing worldview as of idealism, which would be materialism, is what he's stating. I would say, though, that I don't think Bernardo is actually against materialism, or he's not against matter. He's against the idea that unconscious matter is fundamental. And what we perceive as unconscious physical matter in our physical experience is what is comprising fundamental reality. I would say he doesn't agree with that idea, but he doesn't discount the existence of matter. But the materialists, people who describe themselves as materialists, very often will say that there's nothing but matter. It's just matter, and consciousness arises from the matter through processes over time and chance and enough dice rolls or whatever, but probabilistic interactions. And I think that falls apart, and I think Bernardo sees that as well. But I would also say that when Curt says that Susan does not place herself in opposition to anything, I would say that actually the ideology of illusionism places itself in opposition by definition to everything that is the current assumption. That doesn't mean she does. It just means, so she might not, I'm not saying, and I don't think that she does. I think Curt's right, is she doesn't personally seem to do this. But her definition of illusionism kind of does do this, and it doesn't propose an alternative. and even though it might be right in what its kind of initial assertions are, it ends up being an anti-ideology. So it does place itself as an opposition, even if she doesn't, in practice, what she states as her ideology does. She says, I mean, at certain points she says it's not a theory, it's not a worldview, but then she'll say as an illusionist. As an illusionist. Okay, so it is a worldview. But I just think there's some disconnect between what she is stating and how she's kind of interacting with the subject. And that is a good thing, because if she was completely following what she was stating, then it would be worse. But Bernardo is a little different, because he's openly against people who call themselves materialists. But if people ask me, are you against materialism? Well, if materialism means matter is the fundamental, unconscious matter, non-sentient matter is the fundamental foundation of our reality, I would say, yeah, I'm against that idea, because I have an alternative, so I'm not placing myself in opposition, but it's like I'm emergently opposed to that. And I think that Bernardo kind of is that as well. But you kind of can't interact with the community if the community is wrong without being opposed to the community in action. So in the way that he discusses this stuff online, it does come off as he's anti-materialism. But like I said, the reality is that my framework would place matter and ideas as coexisting as two sides of one coin, and that there's just a hierarchy of that leads to one or the other, hierarchical perspective that leads to one or the other. You perceiving it something that exists as one, as being an idea or being matter. But at the same time, there's even a more fundamental perspective that is, people say, minds, because if matter is a less fundamental perspective of ideas in a certain context, in a less fundamental context, and then what are ideas? They are generated from minds, which are beings. They're sentient. They must be sentient beings. I believe that. At least my work seems to imply that. I don't deny that matter exists, and I don't deny that, or that our perspective of matter exists. So you could say matter exists, but I don't like the term exists. Like I said before, it doesn't make sense, because it implies that some things we can use that term for, some things we can't. But the reality is that which really fundamentally does not exist, we don't need to use the term exists to describe that which fundamentally exists. We just say that is. You don't have to say that exists. Just say, yeah, that is. Anything or that, even when you say that, it's like, okay, already we're there. Like, if you're even discussing it, you're already there when we're talking about fundamental existence. You don't have to define it as existing. And that which doesn't exist, you cannot define it as not existing. You just can't get it. It's like with fundamental existence, as soon as you even say anything about it, you're already there. And if, when we're talking about fundamental existence, we cannot say anything about that which does not fundamentally exist, because it just doesn't fundamentally exist. So there's nothing to say about it. You can't even say it doesn't fundamentally exist. There's nothing to say. It's almost impossible to talk about, because we already have to start going down the road of, saying words that exist to describe something that is absent. It's like beyond absent. It's just, I'm purposely being silent. And this is, I don't know, this is just has serious implications on how we speak about this stuff. And that's what I want to talk to people about. Even Bernardo. I would love to talk to Bernardo Kastrup about this. He's invited on the stream at any time. I will formally reach out later this year. But I could better explain what I'm trying to say, demonstrate, were it not for the character limitation inherent to this medium of communication. Oh, I totally get it, Tech Padawan. Don't worry about it. It's fine. But if you want, we do have open calls, voice calls, on my Discord community every Thursday at 7 p.m. Pacific time. They are great if you want to talk on with people and myself on Thursdays on our Discord. There's text channels too on there for discussions that are not on Thursdays, but there's voice calls every Thursday. Just reach out to me on Instagram, either Theory of Everyone or my personal Tyler Marshall Goldstein Instagram, or Tyler Goldstein, I forgot what it is. I think it's Tyler Marshall Goldstein. And send me a private message and ask me for the link to the Discord, and I will send it to you. That's for anybody who would like to participate. Those calls are awesome. I look forward to them every week. So there's one tomorrow. There's no character limit, and the topic is totally open. It's whatever you guys want to talk about, from like 7 to, sometimes midnight, but usually like 2 or 3 hours at least. To clarify, Conway's Game of Life, it's an example of a zero-player game. There is set to initial conditions and given the onset, and is allowed to run like a conception of our universe. Yeah, okay, I get it. It's a game based on cellular automata. Okay, yeah, I knew that. For some reason, when I googled Life, the game, I got the board game. But I was confused when I got that board game. I was like, I feel like this is not the Game of Life that I was picturing, which was with cellular automata growing and, the whole. I know that one that you're talking about now, which is there's certain rules. If it's this far away from one other one or two other ones, then it survives, and if it doesn't, if it's this far away from any others, then it dies, or something like that. It has certain rules that govern the interactions between cellular automata, and then you let it evolve. That I'm well aware of. This Game of Life, this was the one that I've never played. I've played actually Conway's Game of Life that you're talking. I was very confused. But yeah, I don't know what this Life game is actually about. I've heard people talk about it, but I do know what Conway's cellular automata based game is. So let's look at it. I used to mess with this at the beginning of my work a long time ago, but I forgot how to do it. But yeah, this is fascinating to me. It reminds me a lot of some of my work, but in Wolfram's, in just like how it's modeled and how it looks. Interesting. Well, another time we'll focus on that. Type in Conway's Game of Life. Yeah. And I think that but yeah, I don't know. There's a few things there's like there's a personal bit here of from Bernardo that I want to watch, of him explaining him perceiving what would be described by many as a paranormal, phenomenon, and he would be most likely slant or attacked for viewing this in any kind of scientific sense.
Especially under laboratory conditions, when you don't have that emotional charge of real life circumstances, then you would be highly dissociated under normal circumstances. That could be, occasions in which the dissociation becomes porous. And I'm saying this to you because I witnessed one of these cases that I just cannot dismiss. But I don't think it would invalidate science, because even if it can happen, it happens so rarely. Now it's not even rare, but
They're talking about basically telepathy.
the degree of the effect is so tiny that statistically speaking, I don't think it would invalidate anything. Obviously, we can't read each other's minds all the time. Obviously, we don't know what's going on in China all the time, right? So even if there is some porosity under emotionally charged circumstances of normal life, they wouldn't apply under laboratory conditions anyway. And that's why we don't see it under laboratory conditions. So I wouldn't be worried. At least personally, I'm not worried. I mean, I saw one...
I'm not saying I'm worried. It would be terribly exciting. I mean, I've said so many times I would go back into parapsychology if that happened. I mean, the fact is there is no viable theory within parapsychology of how this could work. And if there were evidence that it did work, you could start to do experimental work to test theories, but that just hasn't happened. So that's what makes me kind of, well, it's not pessimistic, but pessimistic about the possibility of being found. But I don't think it's going to happen, but we shall see. And if it did, I still maintain it would have dramatic effects on our understanding of all sorts of things.
Under idealism, it would be nothing extraordinary. Yes,
yeah,
the dissociative
really
boundary. Yeah, the dissociative.
What did you witness, Bernardo? What did you witness? And was one of those?
I was in a... Sure. No, it was not under psychedelics. No. I was on a holiday with my girlfriend. We were sort of out of civilization for 1 week in Germany. She's from Germany. And we were already out of contact with family and friends for 1 week. One day she wakes up in the morning. I was already awake when she woke up. And she says, I had a strange dream. I saw my grandmother with her head wrapped up in gauze, in a hospital with her 2 daughters on her side. Nothing was moving, nothing was happening, but I could pick up from her thoughts that she was okay. And then I was playing with interpreting her dreams from a Jungian perspective for a while. We were playing that game. And when she told me that, I thought, this is highly unusual. And something came into me and I said, call your father. So she called her father. And her grandmother had 3 children, 2 women and her father. And her father was at home, picked up the phone and said, well, good that you're calling. Because in the middle of the night, 2 or 3 hours ago, before she had woken up, her grandmother had had a brain stroke and was in the hospital with her 2 daughters. But the doctor said, although she couldn't speak yet, the doctor said she's not under risk of life anymore. And I thought, this is unprompted, so bloody specific, that I thought, okay, this shit happens. It's all right, I can live with it, and I'm not abandoning science either.
Oh, dear.
So, a couple things. For one, I totally believe him. Why would I not? I have had multiple instances in which this has happened. I feel like most people have had instances in which this has happened. I have told people, oh, I feel like something is wrong with my brother, and then my brother came home from the hospital later that night, and he had been hit by a baseball in a baseball game, and like very, very hard. He played baseball, and cracked ribs, and like it was bad. And then I've had this happen where I saw an ambulance and heading down the road that you have to take to my house. The house I grew up in, but it wasn't like this road heads to hundreds of thousands of houses. Like it doesn't head just to my house. It heads in the direction of my house. And I was with someone and I was like, I have a bad feeling about that. And they were like, yeah, well, hopefully that they're has nothing to do with us, basically, something like that. It was so long ago. We got home and it was sitting outside my house, and my sister had like smacked her head on the corner of a wall and cut it down into the bone, and she was young, and the paramedics were there, and she's like bleeding out of her head, and you could see her skull, and it was like she had been severely injured. And I don't say, oh, I've got a bad feeling about that to every ambulance I see. I think it's the only time I've ever said that about an ambulance. Obviously something bad has happened if there's an ambulance going anywhere, but the only time I ever said that is the only time that it also ended up being at my house. So these things can happen, but what's really interesting is that they don't seem very easily replicatable in laboratory conditions, and I really like what Bernardo Kastrup stated about why they wouldn't, which is that like there are certain emotional connections, is I think what he was getting at, that aren't present in a laboratory state. Like you need it to be real and impactful in order for it to have impact across the multiplicities of sentient beings that would be emotionally entangled. And when my wife and I have bad days, we don't even need to speak to each other to tell each other. Like we don't even have to be around each other. I could be away from home, or she could be away from home, and I will just feel bad, and then I'll speak with her. If I feel bad and I don't know exactly why, it means she's having a bad day, almost 100% of the time. Actually, I've never seen an instance in which I feel bad and I don't know why, and then she's having a great day, and she's like, "Oh, let me tell you, babe, about how wonderful my day was," and vice versa. Never seen it. I think that the emotional entanglement needs to be there, and in a laboratory situation, it's not. And so therefore you could not test this in a lab. And I've never thought about really why it wouldn't work in a lab. I just know that it tends to not. And I mean, I've thought about a few things, but not that one actually, which is kind of funny because it seems so obvious. I've never thought of any explanations for why these things don't work in labs very often, or at least consistently. That has been interesting enough for me to ever focus on. But I really like what Bernardo said there, and it seems so obvious, and I can't believe I've never thought about it. But that implies that it's probably largely correct if it seems so obvious and it was just right there. You need the emotional entanglements in order to, and the real emotional impact for these things to probably, for emotions to transfer between beings in an impactful way. Like, of course, it seems like obvious. And I thought that was so cool. I wanted to end it on something good. I really liked this discussion. These are hard conversations to have, especially for me to watch and then try and talk about, because I do have an alternative proposal, but I can't talk about what they're saying without recognizing the incoherence that I feel like is being generated by talking about it even. But I hope that to some degree this was useful, and that these conversations are useful to you guys, even if it's just seeing the incoherence. One of the best ones that has ever happened, and was the most frustrating stream I've ever had, was Curt Jaimungal did an interview of Leo Gura. And when I first tried to give my commentary on it, I agreed with what Leo Gura was saying, but I didn't agree with how he was saying it. And I didn't know how to state that yet, so I was trying to say that, and I couldn't say I disagreed with him because I didn't. But I hadn't yet figured out how to talk about it. And I had to figure out that I had to say, okay, yes, Leo Gura, I agree with Leo Gura, but there is a directionality to this that I think must be maintained in how we talk about it, or what we say for certain reasons and in certain moments, instead of just saying I agree or disagree. And this was years ago, so I hadn't yet figured that out. And I had to stop the stream. I was so incoherent. And I remember Curt was just watching the stream, and he just comments like, fascinating, because I am just falling apart in the middle of the stream. And I'm glad that he found that fascinating, and I hope that you guys find this interesting, because even when I am losing coherence, and I hope you can see why in certain circumstances, and that it's valuable to see that, even if it's frustrating to me. So it seemed like it was made sense when I was trying to explain it on that stream, at least to some of the people in the audience, and that was good. So I hope this is like that, but it just comes with the territory of giving commentary on discussions about fundamental reality that are not using sometimes language in a way that it would need to be used to maintain coherence. But then I came back on that after that Leo Gura stream. I stopped it and then started another one after I realized how I needed to say what I needed to say, and came back and it was way more coherent. I highly recommend watching those. I think the initial stream, the part one, was only like 30 minutes before I shut it off and gave up, and then I came back on and gave a longer one. But it was called Descending into Decoherence, and it was a huge learning moment for me. So But like I said, please hit the like button, comment any thoughts you have down below, criticism, questions. If you'd like to join the Discord calls, or even just the Discord community, and you don't want to participate in the calls, it's a great group, and you can send me a private message on Instagram or on my personal or Theory of Everyone Instagram. You can also send me a private message on Twitter, and I will try and see that, but Instagram is better. Also, if you'd like to support this project other than hitting the like button and sharing it and commenting and participating, which is the best way to support this project of sentient singularity theory, which there is an end goal for this, which is an experiment and a proposal of a paper and a video explaining a framework of metaphysical framework of reality, which is sentient singularity theory, and then an experiment to kind of that has predictions about the nature of certain forces, and then if you also would like to support this project financially, there is a link to my Patreon below. Very grateful to the patrons that I've had. It has fluctuated over time, but they have been immensely helpful to helping us upgrade, the tools and things that we have here, from computers to cameras and monitors and mics and everything. So if you look at the first video on this channel, you will see it was using very different technological tools, and that is very much largely due to the patrons and support of the patrons. So very grateful to Curt for pushing this discussion out and hosting it between Bernardo and Susan Blackmore. Definitely grateful to both of them for participating as well. These are not easy talks, and I'm glad to see that people are willing to have them publicly. With that, I will let me just check the chat real quick. Watch both of those videos you did on Leo Gura's stream. Your commentary was much more valuable than listening to Gura himself. Bro is kind of out there. His depth is trying to explain what he has. Anyway, I highly recommend that you read The Conscious Universe, The Scientific Truth of Psychic Phenomena, and Entangled Minds, Extrasensory Experience in a Quantum Reality. I will definitely check both of those out. Are you familiar with the U.S. history of remote viewing? Yes, I am familiar with it. If anybody else wants to see more about it, there are streams that have been done with Eric Weinstein and a guy named Jesse, I forgot his last name, his podcast, and with, what is his name? Hal Puthoff, who used to work, I believe, for the CIA, and he worked on Project Stargate, and he talks about that, the history of all that. And it's fascinating. It is fascinating. He also does a pretty comprehensive survey of psychic phenomena as a whole, which is what Bernardo and yourself are describing instances of. It's actually far more readily replicatable than you're thinking. I think it is. It's just it's easily dismissible in many instances, but it's almost constant, I would say, like entangled emotional and mental entanglement. It is constant, but because it's constant, it's easily dismissible. It's rare that you're able to have profound, obvious instances of highly isolated or specific and like precedingly predictable, predictable prior to actually running the incident actually occurring. Like specifically predictable results regarding that. Telepathy, I guess we would say. But I do think that the science of it could get very deep, and who knows, it could get to the point where one day we are literally able to, due to understanding reality differently and the fusion of that and technology potentially, and I don't just mean Neuralink, but maybe something that is similar-ish, able to, instead of sending emojis to each other, you're able to send emotions to each other. I think that is possible. sounds like concerning in some ways, but it I'm sure it has its uses, and I do think ultimately there's a situation in which that would be possible, to like send emotions to each other and communicate with telepathy. So, like I said, with that, I appreciate everybody in the chat. Really, your comments in the chat keep me going throughout these streams, and motivate me to come back. So very much appreciate everybody's participation. Please hit the like button, and I will see you next. What is that? I believe next Wednesday. Just double check. Calendar. Yes, I will be back next Wednesday, and then we will have another stream on Sunday. And then from there it will be Sunday. I'm going to try and do Sundays instead of Wednesdays. So, anyways, thanks guys, and peace.